and being a lunchtime meeting, and I hope you've had your sandwiches or are eating them as we go. I'm sure the people with their videos off are having a sandwich at the moment. We'll get underway. So, look, history of this particular meeting is normally with the Mannum Pulse Check group, we'll get together pre-seeding and we'll discuss things that are new in pulses and also what to look out for the coming season. And with COVID-19 and social distancing happening, obviously our meeting planned for a couple of weeks ago got called off, and we decided to rerun it as a video conference. So we had a bit of a go at it on Wednesday, and we sort of backed out of it because we had a few international gate crashes, but we've gone through a few extra security steps this time, and hopefully we get through this meeting without too much trouble. So it was a bit of a learning experience. So today's meeting, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be firstly looking at what's new in pulses for 2020. We're also going to have a look at what we need to look out for in terms of growing pulses for this year, and what we need to keep in mind, and some of the thinking around the agronomics and those sorts of things. I'll then hand over to Rebecca Starrick, and Rebecca's going to give us an update on what's happening in pulse markets at the moment and moving forward. And then I'd like to just briefly talk about what our program is for Pulse Check 2020. Given that we've got another year's funding, which is great, so GRDC have funded us for another year, and I've got a few ideas there, but we might have to be a bit flexible depending on social distancing rules and those sorts of things moving forward. So that's all. That should take us about an hour, I reckon, and then we'll allow you to go back to your days. If you get bumped off or things stop happening on the way through the video conference, don't worry too much, because this is all being recorded and we're going to post it onto YouTube and forward you guys a link so that you can log in and look at it later. And if you've got any other people that might have missed the teleconference, if you can steer them in the direction of that link, they can catch up on the information as well. So firstly, let's talk about what's new in pulses for 2020. What I also should say is please feel free to interrupt with questions on the way through. If your video's going, you can put your hand up. Not everyone's got their videos going, but yeah, just unmute yourself and fire in the question. I will pause after each section in case there's questions. All right, so...
Sorry, it's Claire here, by the way. If you'd like to, and there's a little chat box down the bottom, you can type it in there anonymously. If you'd like to ask a question, you don't feel comfortable everyone else hearing your question, you can type it down there anonymously and it should come up too.
That's great. Thanks, Claire. All right, so what's new in pulses for 2020? Here's a little bit of a snapshot view of what I see as new in pulses for this year. We've seen a new variety release in lentils. It's a new IMI-tolerant or Clearfield type lentil called Highland XT. Now, for the Murray Plains area, I think this is going to be a really useful variety because unlike the previous varieties, it's significantly earlier in flowering and maturity. And I think in our rainfall zone, we do need something that's earlier flowering and earlier maturing. It's got good grey mould resistance. It's got good resistance to ascochyta as well, and we're hearing of resistance strains of ascochyta out there. This is actually still classed as an MR for the resistant strains, and it's a nugget type grain, so it's a medium red. Look, seed is fairly hard to get hold of at the moment because we are now April, and it's a lot of people have been snapping up seed, but it may be one to keep in mind for next year if you haven't got seed already. So the big thing about it is we can use Intervix or Intercept on these lentils, which we can't use with other lentils, and we can use that to be controlling some problem weeds. The one that comes to mind is Medic, that we do have some Medic issues in lentils from time to time. And also for you vetch producers, often there's volunteer vetch that turns up in lentils, and Intercept will give us the ability to suppress those weeds. So I think it'll be quite a useful one. The other one is that we do have problems with intervix residues or IMI residues in paddocks from time to time. This will be a lentil that we can grow on paddocks that we've got suspected residue problems. So it should be pretty useful. I'll keep moving. Its results through the NVT program, I've highlighted it there. It's done very well. So blue means it's well above the site mean. Greens means that it's at least at the site mean or above. So you can see that Highland is right up the top of the list in terms of its varietal performance in the Southern Mallee NVT trials. It was in the Murray Plains Farmers trials last year. Now the Murray Plains Farmers trials weren't very high yielding, as you can see. Lentils went, topped out at just under 400 kilos per hectare, but it was one of the front runners in terms of its performance in local trials last year. So that's Highland lentil. Another one that's gone under the radar a bit is PBA Pearl. These are field peas, and unlike the Gunyas and Percys and Butlers that we're seeing in the growing in the area, it's a white pea. Now, the thing about it is, being a white pea, it can't be delivered into dun pea segregation. So you've got to think about where you're going to market. But we've got a number of people within the group that grow peas for local stock feed markets. And in the Murray Plains area that there are quite a few stock feed markets or people growing them for on-farm use in piggeries. This particular variety has topped the variety trials for several years. So it's not that popular because it can't be sold through Viterra and other sort of bulk handlers, but for local feed use, it is a very good variety. And you'll see that in the Murray Plains Farmers trial, it was second only to Percy last year. In the NVT trial results, in the Southern Mallee and also across a number of the other lower rainfall districts, it's topped out the variety trials for a number of years. So it's a variety that can really pull in some yields. So PBA Pearl, white pea, and if you're looking at stock feed markets and perhaps on-farm use, it probably has a fairly good role. We talked about Studenica vetch last year within our group. So Studenica is a very early dual-purpose vetch. It produces good grain yields, but also good forage yields. And in 2018, it topped the Murray Plains Farmers trials in both dry matter production, but also grain production. Now, I was just going to point out it was in the trials again this year, or last year, and look, it was certainly a good dry matter producer, but it came back to probably the rest of the pack a bit in terms of its dry matter production, similar to Volga last year. So still maintaining good production, but it wasn't head and shoulders above everything like it was in 2018. It's a very early vetch type. It's one of the earliest flowering commercial types that you'll find around the place, and you could imagine that it would do well in dry seasons like we've experienced in the district in the past 2 years. All right, so what else is new in pulses? I sat in on a webinar that was run by this project just a couple of weeks ago, where Michael Moody from Frontier Farming Systems was talking about some trial work of looking at pulse yield performance on sands. And he put up a really interesting slide, which is this one, that showed the differential performance of a range of pulses on the sandhill versus the flats. So if you look at this graph here, you'll see that the best pulses grown on the sandhills in terms of the least yield reductions were vetch and lupins. So it tells you that vetch and lupins are probably better adapted to sands, the deeper sands, than other varieties. And look, let's face it, in the Murray Plains area, we do have quite a bit of sandy country. Peas, there was sort of middle of the range, so they suffered the yields on sands were 35% below the flats. Lentils were quite highly affected, so it tends to show you that lentils aren't very well adapted to sands. Fava beans pretty ordinary as well, and also chickpeas not very well adapted to those deeper sands. So I thought that was fairly interesting, and probably reflected a lot of what we see commercially across the district and across the Mallee. Now, Michael took it one step further, and they've been doing some deep ripping trials over the years, and particularly last year, and looked at how the different pulse crops have responded to deep ripping. And if you look on this slide, lupins achieved a 22% yield increase by going with deep ripping across the sands. Lentils, a massive 63%, but you also see that the lentil yields weren't necessarily all that high. So the red showing the deep ripped and the blue showing the non-deep ripped. But the lentil yields were only around 350 kilos per hectare. Field peas almost doubled their yield. So they went from around 500 to 600 kilos to up over a tonne per hectare. Vetch, a 32% yield increase. So, vetch also, even though it was quite well adapted to the sand, saw some fairly major yield increases. So it's a bit of a thing to watch, I think, is that we might be able to get some significant yield responses off of our problem sands by deep ripping. So I think watch this space. There's going to be a whole lot more information that will come through in terms of identifying which sands are going to respond to deep ripping versus not. But it's certainly opened my eyes in terms of how we can potentially get some better pulse production in these problem soils. The other one which has certainly created a lot of discussion in the area last year and also the year before was the use of gibberelic acid, which is a naturally occurring plant growth hormone, in pulse crops, and vetch in particular, to try and increase production and maybe increase yield. So the Murray Plain Farmers Group were very innovative and included gibberelic acid trials last year, and they put it out at a range of times. So there was the nil plots here on the left-hand side. There was gibberelic acid applied in the liquid system at seeding time, applied early in early post-emergence and also later post-emergence. Now, despite seeing some fairly major growth responses, visually, in the end, the dry matter production differences weren't as high as we thought they were going to be. And the best one was actually with gibberelic acid applied in the liquid system. So we saw, a couple of 100 kilos per hectare of dry matter produced in that when it was applied in that way. And the photos up above here, the photos of the close-up plants are exactly that. They're photos of the vetch plants that were treated in the liquid system and not treated in the liquid system. So again, something to look out for. I think that gibberelic acid is bringing on the spring flush earlier. It may not be increasing overall dry matter production at this stage, but it's bringing on the spring flush earlier. And in years where we're looking for more winter production, probably has quite a useful role. The other one that growers are talking about and growers are experiencing is that they're improving their hay harvestability by making them stand up a bit better by treating with gibberelic acid. So a number of vetch crops in the district were treated last year just in the aim of increasing the recoverability of hay and standability and recoverability. So, I think it has a role. I thought it would increase dry matter production more than this, but it seems to be having a role in bringing on the spring flush earlier, but also improving hay cuts. All right, that's what I've got new for 2020. Are there any questions at this point? Please feel free to type in the chat box or even yell out, unmute yourself and yell out. It's okay. Otherwise, I'll keep moving through. So what to look out for in 2020? Now, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record because we did talk about this last year as well. We've effectively experienced a drought in many areas of the Murray Plains last year, and herbicide residues are going to be an issue for this year as they were last year. So the big ones to look out for are the SUs or sulfonylureas, so things like Glean, Ally, Logran. We need to be very careful that that we're not pushing the boundaries in terms of growing pulses on SU residues. Now, last year I saw Ally cause some issues with peas sown on paddocks. You know, a good 10 months or so after the Ally went out, which the growers involved said, look, we normally get away with this, but because of the low rainfall in 2018, they didn't. I think we're in the same boat following with pulse crops following SUs in 2019. So be very careful. If you suspect SU residues, probably your best option is a Clearfield lentil, and you know, the Highland that we talked about before, or even Hurricane, because they will tolerate SU residues quite readily. The other one to watch out for is Lontrel. We're all aware of that one, and you know, we've had very little summer rainfall as it's turned out, and we've got some problem soil types in the district, so be very wary about Lontrel residues for pulses this year as well. And also, yet again, the IMIs are going to create some problems this year as well. Now, not all pulse crops are as tolerant or sensitive as others. With beans and peas, they are actually quite tolerant to IMI residues. Lupins, medic and chickpeas and also vetch are of intermediate tolerance, so we'd be reasonably happy in most cases with 10 months and 100 to 150 millimetres of rainfall. For a lot of us, we haven't actually received 100 millimetres since the IMIs have gone out, so you know, be very careful about even vetch following IMI residues of last year. And lentils of the legumes is a very low tolerance unless it's an IMI tolerant lentil. So you know, generally with lentils, you give it 24 months since an IMI's gone out before we look at sowing them. So in a number of cases, I've got growers in this boat where they're looking to grow vetch after an IMI has gone out last year. Vetch for hay generally. So what we're doing is we're looking to sow vetch, but putting an insurance components to the hay mix by putting, say, some Spartacus barley or scope barley in the mix. So at least if the vetch is held back, we've got an IMI tolerant crop type that we can potentially provide that dry matter bulk if the vetch is compromised. So certainly look out for the IMIs moving forward this year. The other one to look out for is if you put any phenoxies, that's 2,4-D, dicamba, in knockdown spikes or out over summer, be very aware that we haven't, in a lot of cases, we haven't had the 15 mils that's required to start the plant backs associated with that. So be very careful if you've used those products about sowing legumes following it. As I said, the plant backs mostly the clock doesn't start ticking until you've had 15 mils of rain, and generally these things, the product labels talk about, depending on the rate used, talk about 2 to 3 weeks plant back. But in a lot of cases, as I said, we've not received that 15 millimetres of rain, so the clock hasn't started ticking on those plant backs even yet. So be very careful. Things could change in the next couple of weeks or so. I'm hoping this rain might be better than they're forecasting, but really, I'd be very wary about sowing legume crops after even spike rates of 2,4-D over summer, autumn. And there is a question over how appropriate those plant backs are when you're dealing with non-wetting sands. They're low in organic matter, and 15 mils, struggles to wet it up. Another thing that we talked about last year was whether we should be having stop-go points for some of the riskier pulses that we grow. So I put up the Murray Plains Farmers results again from not only 2018 but also 2019. And Michael Moody, who conducted the trials on behalf of Murray Plains farmers, has calculated some gross margins on some of the best crop inclusions in best varietal inclusions. So what he's done is he's looked at the best chickpea variety in the trials and calculated the gross margin associated with the best chickpeas, the best field pea variety, the best lentil, and so on. And you see in 2018, chickpeas really did produce quite, negative gross margins. Canola wasn't too bad. It did better than break even. Field peas broke even. Vetch, stewed Nico vetch in particular, did produce above break even yield, and beans were pretty ordinary. In 2019, we'll see that canola wasn't even repped. Chickpeas had a negative gross margin. Field peas did. The lentils didn't do too badly because lentil prices, yields were about 0.4 of a tonne per hectare, but lentil prices were a bit better. Well, we used $600 a tonne, and beans again proved a risky pulse. Now, I guess what I'm posing here is whether we should be looking at the season, the amount of stored soil moisture, and whether we actually scale back or increase the sowings of some of these riskier pulses. And I'll put up some trial results, or I guess the results of a study that was done by David Cann from La Trobe University, and he's modelled 20 years of rotations in the Victorian Mallee, taking in seasonal conditions, rainfall, historic rainfall, and at Birchip. And what he worked out was that in 8 of the 9 loss years for chickpeas, soil moisture at this time of sowing was less than 50 millimetres. So to turn that around, when there was 50 millimetres of stored soil moisture at sowing, chickpeas were mostly in 8 years out of 10, they were profitable crops. So maybe in years where we haven't got stored soil moisture, we should think about whether we're scaling back chickpeas and maybe growing say things like vetch that that produce dry matter, and it's easier to produce dry matter in a low rainfall season than it is a grain yield of a long, a later maturing legume like chickpeas. So, maybe we ought to be thinking about this year where in the Murray Plains area we don't have 50 millimetres of stored soil moisture. Maybe we should be looking at minimising chickpea sowings and looking at maybe crops that are a bit more resilient, like say vetch. Food for thought. Okay, a couple of other things to look out for this year. Seed dressings. Now, I put this up last year as well, and the situation hasn't changed. If you're looking at growing chickpeas, you must put a seed dressing on to protect this crop for ascochyta. So even though chickpeas were grown in a relatively dry year last year, and the seed is has been produced in dry years, the ascochyta that chickpeas gets is probably one of the worst pulse diseases that you'll see. A seed dressing is your first port of call in terms of protecting that crop. Using pea-pickle tea or Thiram is a must for chickpeas. But I'm a bit more lenient when it comes to lentils. So my view is, in terms of using fungicidal seed dressings or lentils, in the Murray Plains area, you probably only need to use it if seed was produced in wet seasons or seed was kept from an already known disease-affected crop, or you're in a high lentil density area. Then I would be looking at pea-pickle tea as a seed dressing. But if you think of lentils grown in the district last year, it was a drier spring. I didn't see ascochyta at all in lentils grown in the Murray Plains or Murray Valley district. I think it's a year where you can step back from seed dressings in lentils. So a must-do for chickpeas. Lentils, I think I think you can get away with it without doing it. And also peas, vetch and lupins, I don't think there's much of a call for it in crops this coming year. And just a word of warning, don't mix these fungicidal pickles and inoculant together. There is a level of antagonism. If you're going to apply them, apply the fungicidal seed dressing first, allow it to dry, and then inoculate the seed on the day or the day before sowing. But don't mix them together in the pickling or seed dressing process. Okay, one of the other things, and this might be what's new in 2020, but it's also what to look out for in the coming year. Murray Plains Farmers Group did some really valuable trial work looking at different methods of inoculation. Now, the crop that they centred on was chickpeas last year, and it shed some really useful light on inoculation and inoculation technique. What they had there was the traditional peat style inoculant, which the peat slurry, and they put it on at the standard rate and also inoculated the seed at double the standard rate of peat inoculant. They also inoculated through the liquid system, and through the liquid system they used a tea bag arrangement. They put peat inoculant into a calico bag that hung in the liquid tank, and the idea was that it washed out the living bacteria and provided a living bacteria in the seed row. And the other method of inoculation they looked at was using a granular inoculum. In this case, it was called Tag Team, at standard rates and also double the rates. And they went out and counted the nodules per plant that were achieved in each of those inoculation treatments. So first learning was that compared to the nil, which virtually had no nodules there, or they might have found one nodule on one plant, it was extremely low levels of success of nodulation in the nil treated. There was a response to slurry inoculum at standard rates, but also it improved when they went double the rates. There was a bit of a step down when we looked at inoculation through the liquid system, which was a bit concerning, and there was the best of the results was the granular inoculum applied at twice the rate. So there were differences in the application techniques, and there was a response in general to actually going higher in rate. The interesting part of it is, in looking at this, you'd say, oh, gee, I should be using the granular inoculants. If we looked at it further in a different light, what they did was they separated off the nodules, and they actually weighed the total nodules that were produced per plant to get an idea of the nodule to root ratio. So what we saw in that when Michael Moody did this work was that the peat and the granule ended up, or the high rates of peat and the granules ended up at about the same weight of nodules per amount of root, which means that although there were fewer nodules in the slurry inoculant, they've actually achieved nodules of a pretty reasonable size. And the success of nodulation is governed by two things. It's not only the number of nodules, but also the volume of nodules that's produced in the crop as well. So what I would say is that peat is still a viable way of doing it. In the liquid system, we haven't seen as good a results. The Tag Team and granular inoculant has done a pretty reasonable job as well. And yes, there's certainly benefits in doubling the rate. Now, also just keep in mind with these trials is that we didn't actually have a very high rainfall year, and these things were sown into sort of marginal soil moisture. What we do know is in marginal soil moisture, the granules do a better job. So we think that that maybe the dry soil conditions have favoured the granular application in the year just gone past. So keep that in mind. That this is certainly a scenario which will favour the granular product. Okay, I'll keep going.
Tony, there's just a comment there. I wonder if the root ratio would have been different in a wetter year.
I think it would have. Would the root ratio? I think a wetter year would have improved all of the responses. I think it would have improved certainly for the peat. We know that the granules do have an advantage in those dry years, but yes, I think look, you're dealing with a living bacteria, and living bacteria will do a lot better if the soil conditions are moist and favourable for reproduction and actually invading the roots. Okay, so messages as far as inoculum goes is just do it. You know, if you're wondering whether you should be inoculating or not, I'd be saying yes, just go ahead and do it if you're in any doubt. If you're dry sowing, double the rate of peat slurry. So we saw there in drier soil conditions, doubling the rate from the label rate did make a difference. And if your seed is already treated with a fungicidal seed dressing, you know, pea pickled tea, for instance, again, double the rate of peat slurry. There is evidence that I haven't put up a slide here. There is evidence there is a certain level of antagonism, and the fungicidal seed dressings do kill off a certain percentage of the inoculum. If you can be keeping the inoculum levels up, there's hopefully enough living bacteria at the end to do the job as far as inoculation. So my theory is, if we double the rate of peat slurry, and this is shown through in trials, you will overcome to a certain extent that antagonism. And just keep in mind that when you are inoculating, you need to be using an inoculant that's specific to the legume type that you're growing. So you'll see there that peas, vetches use a group E inoculant. If you're growing lentils, it needs to be a group F, and chickpeas have a group all by itself, which is the group N. So make sure you're not using a lentil inoculant to inoculate your chickpeas. Okay, so another one that is always one that comes up in just discussions with growers and at meetings is safety with pre-emergent herbicides. So we're out there using a range of pre-emergent herbicides on these pulses. Some people are using metribuzin, some people are using diuron, others are using a mixture of diuron and simazine. On chickpeas, a number of people are using balance and a bit of simazine. There are also some people using a newish product called turbine as well. Now, these things in the wrong soils at the wrong rates and in the wrong place can cause quite a lot of damage to those pulse crops. And you'll see in my picture there, I've got some metribuzin damaged lentils that have been belted around by metribuzin ending up in the seed row. So there's a couple of rules of thumb to try and reduce the chances of you ending up with problems like this. First thing is choosing the right product and the right rate for the soil type. And I'll have a look at the right product in a sec. I'll show you a couple of other slides. Watch the active ingredient. There are ranges of formulations out there for various products. So we were talking turbine. We've got turbine 750 and turbine extreme. Now, there's a lot of turbine used on York Peninsula. And when they brought in turbine extreme, people didn't realise they were using a stronger product, and we built it a lot of lentil crops because we were using the rate that was appropriate for the lower concentration product and applying it to a higher concentration product. Also, be aware that most people are using a granular simazine, which is 900 grams per kilo, but there are lesser strength liquids out there as well. So make sure that if you're talking to another grower, that you're talking the same sort of formulation when you're comparing rates. So people get caught all the time. The other thing that you should be doing is sowing deep with any legume other than lupins. We should be sowing it at 40 and even 50 millimetres. Sowing depth does create a level of, or sowing deeper creates a level of safety when you're using these products, because you're more likely to keep that herbicide away from the soil, the seed zone. The other one to remember is that there's certainly a lot more safety in applying these herbicides incorporated by sowing rather than post-sowing pre-emergent. You'll see on a lot of labels, so simazine and also Diron, for instance, they talk using them post-sowing pre-emergent. Using them post-sowing pre-emergent over the top of press wheel furrows is a risky proposition, and there's a whole lot more safety in terms of using them incorporated by sowing, because these products will then be thrown out of the seed row into the interrow and provide you with more safety. Beware prickle chains and finger tie and harrows as covering devices. I've had growers, even in the last year, that unbeknown to me, has sourced some straw clumps, and they went out after putting the metribuzin out incorporated by sowing. They went out with the prickle chain to smooth out those lumps and effectively raked the metribuzin into the seed row and ended up with crop damage. So, you know, be very careful about using covering devices incorporated by sowing, because you undo a lot of that safety that you've tried to achieve with the incorporated by sowing technique. Beware dry soils. In dry soils, often when you do get the rain, these herbicides follow the wetting front down through the soil. When they follow the wetting front down through the soil, they can end up in the seed zone and cause damage. So if you're dry sowing these crops, be really careful about, you know, I often get guys to leave these group Cs off altogether in a risky sandy soil type, or we look at post-sowing pre-emergent, but after filling in the press wheel furrows, so that we're maintaining some soil depth between the herbicide and the seed. So post-sowing pre-emergent may well be an option in the case of dry sowing, and the trick is that you dry sow the crop, you fill in the press wheel furrows, you wait for the opening rain and put on the Group C herbicide after the opening rain onto a moist soil. So, and you may even scale back the rates to make it just a bit safer. So beware dry soils, beware dry sowing when you're using these products. And also keep in mind, if you're using a single disc seeder, disc seeders have an increased risk. So we've got to be really careful with the rates and where the seed ends up in a disc seeding system. All right, so a bit of additional work, and again, I sat in on a really useful webinar that was put on by the Southern Pulse Extension Project, the project that this Mannum Pulse Check group comes under. And I had Michael Moody from Frontier Farming Systems presenting a webinar on some of his trial work on some of these group herbicides on sand. So what Michael's done is grown hurricane lentils across a sand hill and applied a number of these Group C herbicides, both incorporated by sowing, but also post-sowing pre-emergent, and looked at grain yield following them. So let's start off with Diron. So Diron gets used quite readily or quite often in the district on pulses. And if we look at 400 grams of Diron applied incorporated by sowing, it had pretty reasonable crop safety. So it produced yields very, very similar to no Diron at all. But when he put it on post-sowing pre-emergent, it virtually halved the yields. So it's, as I said, be really careful when you're looking at putting these products on post-sowing pre-emergent over the top of press wheel furrows. Then he decided to increase the application rate. So 800 grams, damage. Post-sowing pre-emergent, damaged it even further. And 1.6 kilos, absolutely smoked it. Metribuzin. So metribuzin again gets used quite a lot, and at 120 grams of metribuzin, that's a 750 gram per litre product, it had okay crop safety. It did reduce yields a bit, but not by much, but it was more damaging post-sowing pre-emergent. Now, word of warning here, when he increased the rates to 180, it was still not too bad. Going to 240, it was still not too bad. So there wasn't really a rate response when it was applied, incorporated by sowing. But be very careful here. I wouldn't be putting 240 grams of metribuzin across a sand in lentils in a fit. I'd be more in this 120, maybe to 180 on the better soils, and certainly going incorporated by sowing. Michael's theory was that it was a drier season last year. Maybe it didn't get the washing of metribuzin down the profile, and potentially ended up a bit safer as a result. So be careful with metribuzin. I think the messages are keep the rate right for the soil type, and also IBS rather than PSPE. Let's look at a couple of others. He did the same with simazine. So 400 grams of simazine, even at IBS, it did cause quite a bit of damage. And as he increased the rate, the damage got worse and worse. And look, here's a bit of a message here. This is turbine, again on the sand. Turbine and lentils, it does get used on lentils, but you really need to be careful about rate and soil type if you're using turbine. So at 425 grams, it did an acceptable job, IBS, but it was absolutely damaging used post-sowing pre-emergent. And so be careful with turbine on sands, and certainly, there's you want to be really careful. That 425 is quite a conservative rate, and you want to be very, very conservative if you're thinking about turbine, and I wouldn't be using it on sands. Okay, another point for this year is that we've come off the back end of a pretty ordinary year for 2 years now on the Murray Plains, and I think there is potential to cut back P fertiliser rates, because in the last 2 years you probably haven't removed the P nutrition that you've put out. What I would say is there's always a benefit in putting out a little bit of fresh, well, there's good insurance in putting a bit of fresh fertiliser applied with the seed. And my suggestion is that, that if you're cutting back rates, 5 kilos of P is still a good rule of thumb to provide a bit of early nutrition around the seed. So 5 kilos of P, that's equivalent to 25 kilos of DAP or 23 kilos of MAP if you want to be exact. So yes, I think there's room to cut back phosphorus rates in 2020, but look, I think I'd put a starter rate out, or just a base rate of 5 kilos, just to cover yourself, to make sure that the seedlings get some P nutrition. The other trick is if you're on a good auto steer guidance system, if you can sow on the rows of last year, it's quite likely that you'll pick up some of the residual fertiliser of last year. And so sowing on the rows, if you can manage it, is a way of utilising some of that nutrition that's potentially left over from 2019. Okay, so that's things to look out for in 2020, as well as what's new. So I'm just going to pause there and open it up for any questions or comments on what I presented there so far. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, or use the chat box if you don't want to ask the question verbally, I'll pause there if there's any questions or comments. No, that's okay.
Tony, there was just a comment there if you wanted to expand on that a bit further about the zinc, where it is acidic and will actually kill the rhizobium.
Yes, it does. Yeah, zinc
Inoculation.
is an zinc is actually an antimicrobial. So people in the pig industry will know that zinc gets used, as well as copper, in feed rations as an antimicrobial. They use it to reduce the reduce scours in the pig. So inoculum is a microbe. So you want to be really mindful that zinc kills microbes, or a number of microbes, and it will kill inoculum. So certainly you don't want to put inoculum and zinc in the liquid stream together if you're using the liquid stream. And also, you want to be very careful about zinc in the liquid stream. I've also seen growers mix zinc and inoculum doing the tea bag system, and yes, I've seen some monumental inoculum failures or nodulation failures. So definitely, copper's another one. So copper is extremely antagonistic with inoculum.
Tony, Peter here. Molly and nodulation, is there any links or trials being done on that?
There hasn't been any local trials on that. Now, Molly is an essential element that does actually promote nodulation and promote the efficiency of nodulation. So if you're low on Molly, putting Molly out there will potentially increase nodulation and nodule health. The trick is to work out whether you're actually deficient in it or not. But there has been, I guess, growers have been putting it out together with copper as well, because there is an interaction between copper and Molly. One ties up the other, so you don't put out Molly by itself without copper to try and just improve nodulation, but also guard against an interaction with one tying up the other. Peter, have you had a crack at Molly on pulses?
We always put some in on our pulses, never with the cereals, but yeah, playing around with it a bit more and just trying to find a rate. Yep.
No, it's there's not a lot of replicated trial stuff in the area on this. There's certainly some evidence in the Adelaide Hills on in pasture legumes on sort of sandy, acidic soils in high rainfall. They've got some good responses to Molly, and I think we probably need to generate some of that data for our area.
Yep.
Thanks for the question, Peter.
That's all right.
All right. If there's no more questions at this point, I'm going to move to change the microphone over to Rebecca Starrick. Rebecca works in Rural Directions Grain Marketing Group, and she's well known to all of you because she's a local as well. I thought I'd get Rebecca along to talk about what we're seeing in pulse markets at the moment and provide an update for us. So, Beck, handing over to you.
Yeah, so hi guys, I'm glad to be involved. And I suppose, as you may have seen recently, there's been a bit of a big story in the news, which is having huge impacts on what our pulse prices are doing, but also then what our cereal pricing is doing. So it's just affecting world markets on a huge scale, and a lot of that's down to currency at the moment. So we've seen the lowest currency since the dollar was actually floated. It got down to 55 cents. So as the dollar moves down, the price goes up because all of a sudden we're more competitive on a global scale. So that's number one. Number two is around the ability and the availability of containers for shipping pulses overseas. Because there hasn't been as much trade happening, there's been a backlog of containers, which has meant that there's been a short exposed in the market and the prices continue to come up. So we have seen today lentil prices in particular get to $800 a tonne. Now, this time last year, I would have said, nope, there's no way that could happen, because fundamentally nothing's changed. India still has protectionist policies around not allowing too much lentils or chickpeas into the country, and that's not too positive for price. However, as soon as we have an issue like coronavirus, where we start to see global trade issues and issues in logistics, we start to see a short come about, and that's why we're seeing the prices rally like we are at the moment. So Tony's just gotten me to, I suppose, talk about a few of the commodities that we have in our area, and I'll start with lentils. Lentils driven by currency. There's, like I said, issues with the logistics and a logistics collapse within India itself. And so they're actually starting to see issues in terms of getting product from the markets into the homes of the Indian people. So that's really where the price is at the moment. Fundamentally, they had a really good crop this last 12 months for lentils and chickpeas. So they're not likely to start to open up the borders and allow that trade flow to happen like we had pre-2016. On the chickpea front, again, it's very similar. We still have quite large world stocks as well, and they've fallen out of favour with a lot of growers because the pricing is just not there. It's the same in Canada as well. They've actually stopped producing or putting in as much area to chickpeas, primarily because they're just not priced well. Field peas, in the last 2 years, they've really been domestically driven. So looking for those stock feed markets, and that's where we've seen the higher prices. We are seeing a shift overseas to an increase in pea production, but that's because it's all going into the protein extraction market. So for all of your fake meat sort of products, that's where a lot of that pea protein is going. There is markets popping up in Australia for that sort of extraction market, value adding sort of industry. There is a plant going in Victoria at Horsham, but what that means for peas, it's more driven towards fava beans. What that means for peas, we don't quite know yet. The other one Tony wanted me to touch on was vetch. Vetch seed is very hard to price. What we do know is if we've had a dry season, the price of vetch goes up. If we've had a wet season, then the price of vetch goes down. And that's really all that is driving it at the moment. At the moment, we're seeing values of $800 to $1,000 per tonne for vetch seed. And yeah, that's what we expect to continue for the short term, at least, until we get a decent season under our belt. So that's pretty much pulse markets for this year and what to expect. In the short term, all we're really going to see is continued impacts from the coronavirus. But what that means then at the end of the season, we don't quite know yet. And we're just on for a ride, and I can't give you any firm numbers because we're just, taking on this ride at the moment and seeing where it goes. So does anyone have any questions in particular on pulses or what the market's doing at the moment?
Well, $800 a tonne, I wouldn't have thought we'd see that, from the lows of last year. That is amazing.
Yeah, and particularly like 2016, we had a lot of vetch around the place where it was $300 a tonne, if not less. Yep. So, and you couldn't get rid of it. And now we've seen the opposite. So with sheep values really good as well, that's helping to support that vetch price.
Any other questions for Beck?
Yep, Adrian here. Where do you see lupin prices going?
I was waiting for this question. Lupins. Again, lupins are very hard to price because it is a domestic market. What we saw last year in harvest is lupin values did get to pretty well that 600 mark over this side of South Australia, and a lot of that was driven for the need for feed. I think we will see that relax coming into harvest this year, just because, particularly if we have an average season, then the need for lupins is decreased. And yeah, like I said, it's hard to know which way it's going to go, just because a lot of it is a farmer to farmer trading sort of system. There's no real defined market for it, but I think it will be less, particularly if we have a average season, which I'm hoping we do 100%. So
any other questions for Beck? No worries. Look, I think we're running very well to time. I just wanted to put one more slide up and one more set of ideas, which might be fiction at the moment, but we'll work it through. So, as I said, GRDC have given us another year of funding to continue with the Mannum Pulse Check group, and as you know, we run this. We run this under the umbrella of Mallee Sustainable Farming Systems Group, and Birchip Cropping Group are the overall managers of the project. So hence we've got Claire online today doing the technical stuff. So look, when I put to GRDC a potential program for this year, and obviously with coronavirus and that sort of thing, we might have to be a little bit flexible this year, which is, you're probably seeing an example of it even with today's video conference. So my thinking was that, that as per normal, we would do a preceding meeting, and it just happens to be a video conference. My aim was to run an early emergence crop walk, so we'd hold that in the local area, and we get out and have a look at some of these pulse crops, and again, like we have in the last couple of years, talk about not only what's out there and how the crops are performing, but then to talk about management from then on in. And we do a few plant counts. We talk about weed control. We talk about what pests to look out for, and management over for the months ahead. Now, what I've also planned is that meeting 3, I thought just for something different, we'd put us into either a convoy of utes or even a minibus, and do a trip over to the lower mid-north. And my thinking there was to go and visit some pulse growers, to see pulses in another area, but also to also have a look at the packing and processing side of things as well, by either going to Bowman's and having a look at the AGT set up there, or out to Dublin. And then meeting 4, which we normally hold in September, was I was looking at joining in with the Murray Plains Farmers Crop Tour, and we have a component of that day that we firstly we'll be having a look at the pulse validation trials anyway, but we'll also talk pulse management as part of that day's program. And rather than double up with multiple events in the district, let's bring the 2 together. And I think a number of you within the group suggested that would be a good idea last year. So look, that's the plan for this year. But what happens in reality is going to be dependent on social distancing, what sort of regulations and recommendations we've got from government in terms of how we operate in the coming year. So that's the hope. The reality might be quite different. So look, I was just going to run that past you. That's a suggestion. I'd be open to any further suggestions or plan Bs or additions to that program that might fit in with social distancing. I'll open it up to discussion now, or if you'd like to just see how things pan out over the next couple of months, we can say, okay, let's regroup following seeding and work out what we do from there. So look, I'll open it to discussion.
Yeah, Tony here, Peter here. I think, well, a fortnight's a long time with the coronavirus, so I'm thinking we'll stick to what we got, but yeah, play it by ear by the end of May or something, we'll reassess it then.
Yep. That's how I intended to run it, Pete. Yeah, I reckon that's a very good suggestion. Yeah. We just
but yeah, we got some sort of guideline there, and yeah, let's stick with that. And
Yep. Work out a plan B if social distancing continues. But plan B wise, we'd be getting together like this as a more discussion related thing. There's obviously a fair bit of presentation in this particular meeting, but there might be ways that we can share ideas and information, post seeding that doesn't involve us getting together face to face either. So let's watch this space, and we'll see how things develop over the next couple of months, and we'll regroup post seeding with a plan, a modified plan if we need to.
Yep.
Any other comments or suggestions? No, that's good. All right, look, I'm right on my hours teleconference, video conference, so that's worked really well. Look, just before we do close, thanks to Beck for providing her time today and her knowledge on the marketing side of things. I reckon there was some really clear commentary there and messages there. It's we're on a bit of a ride at the moment, so that was really good. Thanks, Beck. I'd also like to thank Claire too for doing the technical part of the meeting. I forgot to introduce her before, but she's been really good in firstly vetting who's on and who's off the teleconference this time, because we just had a few problems last year. So thank you very much, Claire, for organising the technical part of it and helping me through this. Claire, by the way, is recording this, and we'll send a link around to the rest of the group so they can view this video conference in their own time. And I'd also like to thank Mallee Sustainable Farming Systems too for hosting the Pulse Check program, and allowing I guess a lot of the organisation and the promotion behind it. And we've also got Tegan, who's on the video conference at the moment, who's taking this all in. And Tegan's been really helpful in helping me promote these sessions, and she'll continue to do that as well. So thank you, Tegan, for sitting in and your help in getting the word out. So look, I'm at 1:30 or just after 1:30 at the moment, so I think we'll call it a day from there. Best of luck for seeding, everybody. I hope we get that big opening rain in the district that we haven't quite got yet, and we don't talk about Plan Bs with pre-emergent herbicides and dry sowing, that it's a really wet sowing. And I hope your seeding goes well and efficiently without too many hassles. And look forward to catching up with you all post seeding.
thank you, Tony.
See you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.